Louisville, Kentucky, spring 2008. The morning Marcus Carter left for Belize was the kind of soft, golden morning that made everything feel lighter than it really was. Denise stood barefoot in the kitchen, her robe tied loosely at the waist, coffee in hand, watching her husband zip up his suitcase for what was supposed to be a quick business trip. Their daughter Layla, 6 years old and tangled in pink pajama fleece, sat at the table swinging her legs, eating her Lucky Charms in slow, sleepy bites. 2 nights, that's it, Marcus said with his usual half grin, the one that had once made Denise fall for him at a college basketball game 12 years ago. Survey the site, meet the team, enjoy some beach sun, and I'll be back before you even miss me. Denise smiled but didn't say anything. She didn't like boats, didn't like Belize, didn't like when her husband was too far away to reach. Something about this trip felt off, but she didn't want to sound paranoid. She was a nurse at Methodist Hospital, practical, grounded. Worrying wasn't in her job description. Still, something inside her tugged. Marcus knelt beside Layla, brushing her hair from her eyes. Be good for Mommy, all right? I'll bring you back something from the ocean. Like a shark tooth? She asked, eyes wide. Even better. He winked, then kissed her forehead. And then he was gone. She stood there long after the front door clicked shut, the sound of his car fading down the street. Something inside her didn't settle. It hadn't for a while. She thought back to a moment, just 2 months earlier, when Marcus had come home late from a client dinner. He'd smelled different. Not bad, just not familiar. A cologne she didn't recognize. A way of speaking that felt too rehearsed, too polite. That night, he'd kissed her on the cheek, not the lips, then showered with the door locked. Denise had stood in the hallway, palm resting against the cool wood, listening to the water run. She wanted to ask him, wanted to demand the truth. But instead, she did what she'd always done. She gave him the benefit of the doubt. Because Marcus wasn't just her husband. He was her history, her safety, her everything. And besides, what kind of woman questioned a man who had never given her real reason to? Still, in the pit of her stomach, something had begun to unravel. Little silences, lingering glances, the way his eyes wandered when she talked about Layla's piano recital, the way he sometimes held his phone too tightly, screen, turn away. Maybe deep down, she'd known, that this trip wasn't just about business, that something was ending. But love has a way of covering rotten silk, and Denise, loyal to the core, had chosen silence over suspicion, a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The next 3 days were ordinary. Denise went to work, Layla went to school, and the rhythm of life continued. Until Sunday morning, 6:38 a.m., when the house phone rang. Mrs. Carter, a man's voice official and flat. This is Andrew Morrison from the U.S. Embassy in Belize. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Denise's heart dropped into her stomach before he even said the words. There's been a boating accident. Your husband's vessel went missing off the coast of Ambergris Cay. A storm rolled in suddenly, strong currents, poor visibility. We've recovered debris, but no survivors. I'm very sorry. Denise didn't cry. Not then. Not even when she had to explain to Layla, using the word gone instead of dead, because somehow it sounded less final. The tears came later, at night, in the closet where Marcus's shirts still smelled like his cologne. In the car, when Layla asked if heaven had oceans. In the sterile, awful room at the insurance office where a man in a tie slid over a check for $250,000 and handed her a death certificate stamped with the words presumed deceased. That phrase haunted her. No body was ever found. The Coast Guard ended their search after 10 days. Belizean authorities ruled it a weather-related marine accident. Denise called the embassy 5 times. She got the same answer each time. Sometimes the sea keeps what it takes. The funeral was closed casket. The church was full. Friends brought casseroles. Coworkers hugged her awkwardly in the hallway. Everyone said the same things. He was such a good man. I can't believe it. You're so strong, Denise. But she didn't feel strong. She felt like a ghost in her own home, walking from room to room, touching things Marcus had once touched, whispering why, into the empty air. She barely ate. She forgot to turn on lights. At night, she lay awake, clutching his old hoodie, listening to the creaks in the floorboards like they were his footsteps coming back. People offered help, grief groups, therapists, blind dates, but she turned them all down. All she wanted was her husband. All she had left was a photo of him smiling on their last vacation, his arms slung around her shoulders, her head on his chest. She printed 3 copies and framed them. One went in the hallway. One stayed on her nightstand. And the third, the most important, went into Layla's room, where Denise would sit every night and tell her daughter stories of a man who, in her mind, had been perfect. "Your daddy loved the sea," she'd say softly, brushing Layla's hair. "But he loved you more." 15 years would pass before she'd ever know the truth. That Marcus Carter didn't drown. That he hadn't been taken by the sea. He'd simply walked away. The years that followed were slow and colorless, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Denise Carter didn't date, didn't dance, didn't laugh the way she used to. Her smile became a polite reflex. Her heart, a vault sealed shut the day Marcus disappeared. She returned to work just 3 weeks after the funeral. The nurses on her floor gave her sympathetic glances, offered help folding charts or doing rounds, but Denise never wanted charity. She just wanted routine, anything to keep her mind from drifting back to that voice on the phone, that final sentence, "I'm very sorry." At night, the house was too quiet. Layla's soft breathing through the baby monitor was her only comfort. Sometimes she'd sleep on the floor of her daughter's room, curled up like a wounded animal, trying to shield her cub from the cold world outside. The check from the insurance company stayed untouched in her drawer for nearly a year. When she finally cashed it, she used it only for practical things, a college fund for Layla, a modest car, home maintenance. Not a dime was spent on herself. She didn't believe in new beginnings, only preservation. Every Sunday for the first year, she went to the cemetery where Marcus's gravestone stood, clean, polished, inscribed with the words, "Loving husband, devoted father, lost too soon." Denise had picked them herself, clutching a pen with shaking hands. She brought lilies. He never liked lilies, but he was dead, and the dead couldn't argue. By the time Layla turned 10, she'd begun to ask real questions. "Mom, do you think Dad was scared?" Denise always paused. She'd look into her daughter's brown eyes, so much like his, and say, "Maybe, but your dad was brave. He always protected his family." Even at the end, she didn't tell Layla that there were nights she dreamt Marcus was still alive, stranded somewhere on an island, calling out her name. She didn't tell her that she sometimes awoke convinced she heard footsteps in the hall or the scent of his shaving cream in the air. Grief plays tricks like that. Years passed. Layla grew. The house changed. Furniture got replaced. Paint faded. But Denise never touched the hallway wall where the family portrait hung, the only picture of the 3 of them together. She dusted it carefully every Saturday, as if preserving a relic. And through it all, she remained loyal. Loyal to a memory. Loyal to a man who, to the rest of the world, was gone. Charisse and Lana, her 2 closest friends, never gave up on her. They'd known her since high school, watch her fall in love, marry Marcus, and collapse the year he died. Charisse, a realtor with a big laugh and a blunt tongue, tried pushing her out of her shell. "Girl, you're not dead. You still got hips, and eyelashes, and a killer smile when you use it." Denise would just shake her head and pour more tea. Lana, a quieter soul who taught piano, tried the gentle route. "He wouldn't want this for you. He'd want you to move on." But how do you move on from someone who left a ghost in your bed, a hollow space in your chest? By the time 2023 arrived, Denise was 50, though her friends swore she didn't look a day over 40. Her hair had silver strands now, but her skin remained smooth, her eyes sharp, not for vanity, but from a life lived in quiet observation. Layla was 21, a junior in college, studying media and journalism. She had her father's smile, her mother's poise, and the confidence of someone who had never seen her mother date. Not once. That spring, Layla came home from school with a new fire in her voice. "Mom," she said one morning over eggs and toast, "I think you should go somewhere this summer." Somewhere, yeah, a real vacation, with people, and sunlight, and cocktails with fruit in them. "I have work. You have PTO, and 2 friends planning a trip. Don't think I haven't heard them whispering in the kitchen." Denise raised an eyebrow. Charisse and Lana put you up to this? Layla grinned. They're worried about you. Denise sipped her coffee. Worry implies something is broken. Layla leaned forward, voice softer. Mom, not everything that's broken shows on the outside. There was a pause. Denise looked at her daughter, really looked. The girl who'd grown up without a father, who had believed every bedtime story Denise ever told about a man she loved more than life itself. Maybe Layla needed to see her mother come alive again. And maybe Denise needed that too. That night, she stood in front of the mirror, holding a dress she hadn't worn in over a decade. Blue silk, straps, low back. Marcus once said it made her look like a dream. Now, she just looked like a woman trying to remember who she'd been before she learned to carry grief like a second skin. She packed the dress and booked the ticket. Bahamas, July 2023. The salt air hit Denise the moment she stepped off the plane. Warm, rich, heavy with the scent of hibiscus and ocean. She hadn't smelled air like this since her honeymoon with Marcus, a detail she didn't share with Charisse or Lana. Some things were better left unsaid. The resort was tucked into a private cove on the northern edge of Paradise Island. It had sprawling white cabanas, infinity pools that spilled into the sea, and staff who smiled like they'd been trained at Disneyland. The whole place was engineered to make you forget real life. And for the first time in 15 years, Denise tried. She drank piña coladas under palm trees. She let Charisse convince her to wear sarong that showed her legs. She even joined Lana at sunrise yoga, despite the awkward crack of her joints and the way the instructor kept calling everyone goddess. But something in her refused to fully settle. There was a pull, a shadow, just behind the joy. Grief is strange that way. It can sit dormant for years and then rise up like a wave with no warning. It happened on the third afternoon. The sun was low and gold. Denise was walking back from the spa alone, her skin warm and relaxed from a lavender scrub. She passed the family pool, kids splashing, parents reading, when a laugh pierced the air. A deep, familiar laugh. She froze. No, it couldn't be. But there he was, standing near the pool, holding a beach ball, wearing blue swim trunks and sunglasses. Marcus, her husband, laughing with a little girl who looked about 7 and a boy maybe 10. A woman stood beside them, dark-skinned and elegant, with a wide-brimmed straw hat and coral lipstick. Denise's breath caught. She stepped behind a hibiscus hedge, heart pounding, skin ice-cold despite the heat. Her mind spun. You're hallucinating. But then the woman said, Daniel, take Milan for a rinse before dinner. She's sticky with sunscreen. And he answered, that voice, that tone. All right. Come on, kiddo. Daniel. She whispered it like it was poison. Denise didn't go back to the cabana. She walked the perimeter of the resort like a woman sleepwalking, tracing him from a distance, watching. He moved differently now, looser, freer, but it was him. The same slope of his shoulders. The scar on his left calf from a college biking accident. The way he pushed his sunglasses up onto his head like he always used to. She found a quiet spot on a bench and stared at the ocean. Marcus. Alive. Living under a new name. And not just alive, thriving. With a new family. A new wife. 2 children. A whole world built on her pain. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her hands trembled as she sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through the resort's Wi-Fi-connected guest directory. Daniel Wells. Miami, Florida. Family of 4. She searched Facebook, found his wife's account. Simone Wells. Photos of their family on vacation. Ziplining, snorkeling, sipping cocktails at sunset. Pictures of Daniel holding his daughter with a tenderness that broke Denise's ribs from the inside. She zoomed in on one photo. Him sitting on a hammock, reading a book. His wedding band was gone. Of course it was. She opened her wallet and took out the worn black and white photo she kept, the only one of the 3 of them together. Her, Marcus, Layla. They looked so young, so foolish. The next morning, she told Charisse and Lana that she was feeling sick, sunstroke, maybe, and stayed behind while they went on a boat tour. But she didn't stay in the room. She walked back to the family pool, sat in a shaded cabana, and watched. Watched him rub sunscreen on Simone's back. Watched him toss Jordan into the pool. Watched him be the man she had grieved for 15 years. and something inside her snapped. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. He had stolen her life, her future, her belief in truth. He had left her to drown in a grief he orchestrated. And worst of all, he looked happy. That night, she opened her suitcase and unzipped the lining where she'd tucked a small leather case. Inside was the .38 revolver she'd owned for years. Legal. Registered. Kentucky issued. A gift from her father after a home break-in when Layla was 3. She hadn't fired it in over a decade. She ran her hand over the handle. There was no decision to make. It had already been made the moment she saw him call himself Daniel. Bahamas, 3 days after the discovery. Denise Carter had always believed in evidence. She was a nurse, a woman of science, of data, of facts that could be charted and verified. And even though every bone in her body knew that man at the pool was Marcus, she couldn't act until she proved it beyond doubt. So she did what she had always done best. She started observing. From her balcony, she had a clear view of the bungalow 2 doors down, the one where Daniel Wells and his family were staying. She bought a wide-brimmed sun hat and dark sunglasses from the resort gift shop, and with her Kindle in hand, she positioned herself as just another tourist, lounging in the sun. But behind the book, her eyes never stopped moving. She noted details: Daniel's gait, his dominant hand, still to right, the tiny freckle near his jawline he used to call his lucky mole. Simone kissed it once in a photo. That stung. But the real confirmation came from Jordan, the boy. One afternoon, Denise overheard Simone call out, "Jordan, remember to grab your dad's allergy meds." Marcus had seasonal allergies. Brutal ones. He used to sneeze his way through Kentucky spring. She Googled Daniel Wells that night. Nothing turned up before 2010. No high school photos. No job history. Just a LinkedIn profile listing him as independent maritime consultant based in Miami. The timing matched. Marcus had vanished in 2008. Daniel Wells appeared 2 years later. Denise needed one more thing. A direct, physical link. So she did something she hadn't done in years. She used Layla's skills. Back home, her daughter had taught her how to use search tools, metadata apps, and social engineering tricks for a college project on digital footprints. Denise wasn't tech-savvy, but she wasn't helpless either. She found Simone Wells' Facebook and scrolled deep into her photo archive. There, in a 4th of July post from 2015, was the image that made her stomach flip. Daniel, Marcus, was grilling in a backyard, shirtless. A close-up shot, candid and relaxed. And on his ribcage, barely visible under a shadow, was the tattoo he got on their wedding anniversary. D+M, until the sea gives us back. Denise had cried when he got it. Marcus wasn't a tattoo guy, but he'd said, just in case I ever forget what I die for. Now he was living like it never existed. That night, Denise stood in the hotel bathroom staring at her own reflection. There were lines around her eyes now. Her skin wasn't as tight. Her collarbones a little more prominent. But something about her face looked sharper, stronger. Like every year of grief had carved her into someone tougher than before. She opened the safe in the closet. Inside was the note she had written the morning after seeing him. If you're reading this, it means I'm either dead or free. She placed a photo of the tattoo beside it, along with the printout of Daniel's online profile and a final letter to Layla. It read, "He didn't die. He ran, and he never looked back. I just need you to know, I waited. I mourned. I honored him. I did everything right. But now, I'm done waiting." She closed the safe, reset the code, and sat down on the edge of the bed. The next morning, she made no small talk with Cherise or Lana. She told them she needed some time alone to visit the spa again. Instead, she walked the full length of the resort, down to the private parking lot where golf carts and personal vehicles were stored. She waited. 2 hours passed. Then she saw him. Marcus came walking out of the gift shop, holding 2 bottles of sunscreen and a small inflatable dolphin. He looked like the world's most relaxed dad. He stopped beside a silver resort shuttle van and dug through his pockets for keys. Denise stepped into view. She called his name, not Daniel, but Marcus. His body went rigid. Slowly, he turned. There was a flicker of recognition, of fear of something else. "Denise." It wasn't a question. It was a confession. She stared at him for a long, breathless moment. I buried an empty casket for you. I raised our daughter alone. I stopped living because I thought you were dead. I didn't know you'd be here, he stammered. That's what you got from all this. You didn't know I'd be here. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said the words that would shatter her restraint. I just wanted out. Of everything. You made it too easy. Time froze. Her hand went to the bag, and for the first time in 15 years, she felt clear. Bahamas Resort. Sunset, July 2023. The breeze off the ocean was warm, but Denise Carter felt nothing. She stood in the resort's back parking lot, a quiet stretch of cracked pavement framed by palm trees and golf carts, staring at the man she once loved, the man she had buried, the man who had just admitted without flinching that he chose to disappear. Across from her, Marcus, or Daniel now, held a sunscreen bottle in each hand like shields, his sunglasses pushed up onto his forehead, exposing eyes that used to look at her with devotion. Now they just looked annoyed. You made it too easy, he had said. That sentence echoed inside her skull like a siren. Too easy, as if she'd handed him the shovel to dig her own grave. As if her loyalty, her mourning, her heartbreak, all of it had been a joke. You let me believe you were dead, she said quietly, voice trembling. I grieved you. I taught our daughter to love a ghost. Denise, listen, he sighed. I didn't plan for you to suffer. I just needed a way out. I wasn't happy. With you, with us. That life, it felt like drowning. So I let the ocean take me. It wasn't about you. It was survival. That did it. The way he spun betrayal into victimhood. The way he said, it wasn't about you, as if that made anything better. Marcus stepped back slightly, his voice now a mix of panic and pleading. Look, I didn't plan for it to go like this. I was going to tell you eventually. I just didn't know how. One lie turned into another, and by the time I thought about turning back, you had already buried me. He looked down at the cracked pavement between them, then back in her eyes. I know what I did was cowardly, but I was drowning Denise. Every day, I felt like I was performing in a life I didn't belong to. The job, the mortgage, the family expectations. You were amazing. Too amazing. And I felt like a fraud beside you. He took a shaky breath. When that storm came in Belize, I didn't see tragedy. I saw a door. An escape. I didn't think of it as betrayal. Not then. I thought maybe you'd be better off. Free to find someone who really deserved you. Denise's eyes hardened, unblinking. You think I was better off crying over an empty grave for 15 years? He flinched. I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't brave enough to face the fallout. So I ran. And when I started over, I told myself I was doing everyone a favor. He raised his hands, as if surrendering to his own cowardice. I was wrong. I know that now. But please, don't let one mistake define both our lives. That's when she reached for the bag. Denise reached into her bag. Marcus's eyes narrowed. What are you? She pulled out the revolver. Small, black, cold as the void between them. Marcus took a half step back, sunscreen bottles clattering to the pavement. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Maybe he thought it was a bluff. Maybe he thought she was still the same soft-hearted girl he left behind. But Denise wasn't soft anymore. She was bone and fury, and 15 years of grief molded into steel. You don't get to walk away twice, she said, and pulled the trigger. The sound cracked through the air like thunder against glass. One sharp, deafening pop. Marcus staggered. A blooming red stain spread across his white t-shirt, right over the tattoo he once called his eternal promise. He collapsed against the van, then slid to the ground, eyes wide in shock. He didn't speak again, didn't get a second breath. Denise stood still, heart racing, body calm. She looked down at the gun in her hand, no longer a weapon, but a release. The pain, the questions, the sleepless nights, all of it dissipated like steam rising from hot asphalt. Voices erupted around her. A resort staffer screamed. Footsteps pounded the pavement. Denise didn't run. She didn't move. She walked slowly to a stone planter filled with hibiscus and sat on the edge, revolver still in hand, but pointed toward the ground. When security arrived, shouting and frantic, she calmly placed the gun beside her, raised her hands, and nodded. I'm not going anywhere, she said. When the officer snapped cold cuffs around her wrists, she whispered, almost to herself, "He died in 2008. Today, I just buried him properly." Cherise and Lana were still on their boat tour when it happened. Layla got the call at 3 a.m. back in Kentucky. She didn't believe it at first. Didn't want to. But when she arrived in the Bahamas 12 hours later and saw her mother sitting silently in a holding cell, composed, collected, not a tear in sight, she knew this was no mistake. "Why, Mom?" Layla asked through the glass. "Why now?" Denise didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "Because I couldn't carry him anymore." Marcus's death made headlines. American man killed in Bahamas by wife thought widowed for 15 years. Insurance fraud, secret lives, and a fatal reunion. Widow turned killer. Was it justice or revenge? Everyone had an opinion. Simone Wells disappeared from public view. Their 2 children were flown back to Miami under the care of an aunt. Authorities confirmed that Daniel Wells was, in fact, Marcus Carter, using dental records and fingerprint files still archived in Kentucky. It took less than a week to undo 15 years of lies. Denise Carter never denied what she did. In her first official statement to the police, she said, "He faked his death and left me to rot in grief. I mourned a man who was drinking cocktails with a new wife while I put flowers on an empty grave. I may be guilty, but I'm no monster. He already buried me first." Florida, March 2024. The courtroom was cold, not from air conditioning, but from the way silence hung like frost on the walls. Even the reporters in the back row had stopped typing. At the defense table, Denise Carter sat straight-backed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Dressed in navy blue, hair pulled back in a tight bun, she looked more like a school principal than a woman on trial for second-degree murder. But her eyes told a different story. Clear, worn, unflinching, like someone who'd already served her sentence long before the handcuffs ever clicked shut. The prosecution painted the case as calculated vengeance. "Ladies and gentlemen," the district attorney began, pacing slowly across the polished tile floor. This was not self-defense. It was not an act of passion. This was cold, premeditated murder carried out in broad daylight, at a family resort, no less, in front of witnesses, and with a weapon she chose to bring across international borders. He held up the revolver in a sealed plastic bag. Denise Carter didn't just kill Marcus Carter. She made sure the world watched while she did it. The jury stared at the weapon like it might still burn through the bag. Then came the defense. Her attorney, Miriam Colton, a sharp-witted, silver-haired woman who had once served as a federal prosecutor herself, stood and spoke in a voice calm as rain on glass. "My client is not denying that she pulled the trigger. But let's be honest, Marcus Carter pulled the first one. 15 years ago, he aimed at his wife's life and blew it to pieces. She let that hang for a moment before continuing. He faked his death, left her with a child, a grave a lie. And while she mourned, he built a brand new family under a brand new name, sipping pina coladas by the beach. Tell me, what kind of man does that?" A few jurors shifted in their seats. "You're not just judging what happened in that parking lot. You're judging everything that led to it." A woman pushed so far past grief that grief became her whole identity. The turning point came on the 5th day, when Denise herself took the stand. The courtroom leaned in as she raised her right hand and took the oath. Then she sat, eyes locked on the prosecutor, waiting. "Mrs. Carter," the DA began, "do you deny bringing a firearm to the Bahamas?" "No." "Do you deny approaching Marcus Carter, or as he called himself, Daniel Wells, in the resort parking lot?" "No." "And do you deny shooting him point blank in the chest?" Denise blinked once. "I don't deny it. I did it." A murmur rippled through the gallery. "Then what, exactly, do you want this jury to understand?" She turned to face them now, not with rage, but with a steady, mournful clarity. "I want them to know that I buried my husband twice." A pause. Once in 2008, when they told me he drowned. I grieved him. I raised our daughter alone. I honored his memory. I lived every single day under the weight of that loss. And then, in 2023, I found out that he didn't die. He walked away. He started new life like we never existed. That kind of pain doesn't fit in a courtroom. It doesn't get measured in degrees of murder. She took a breath, eyes glassy but defiant. You want to put me in prison? Fine. But don't pretend I didn't already serve 15 years. Don't pretend I didn't suffer more than most people could survive. The final blow came from Layla. Called as a character witness for the defense, now 22 years old and composed beyond her years, Layla stepped onto the stand in a black blouse, her voice even and unwavering. My mother raised me to believe in a father who never existed. She taught me loyalty, strength. She told me he was brave, that he loved us. I carried that lie like a badge. She turned toward the jury. When I found out the truth, I didn't just lose my dad. I lost the image of myself, the world I came from. And I watched my mother, this woman who never dated, never broke, never failed, finally shatter. One juror wiped away a tear. If loving someone that deeply can destroy you, then what does justice really look like? After 7 hours of deliberation, the verdict was announced. Guilty of second-degree murder. Sentencing, 20 years, with possibility of parole after 15. Denise stood as the judge read the sentence and nodded once. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. When asked if she had anything to say, she answered simply, "Some people get to start over. Others have to finish what was left behind." And with that, Denise Carter was escorted out of the courtroom, not as a free woman, but no longer a widow carrying someone else's ghost. As the bailiff led Denise toward the side exit, she paused just for a second and turned her head. Layla stood behind the courtroom rail, frozen in place. Their eyes met, one last time as mother and daughter before years of glass and concrete would separate them. The officer beside Denise gave a small tug on her elbow, but she held firm. "Just a moment," she said softly. The judge, moved by the gravity in her voice, nodded once. Layla stepped forward, trembling. Her arms wanted to reach out, but her hands clenched at her sides instead. "Mom, I need you to promise me something," Denise whispered, her voice raw but steady. "Anything. Don't waste your life waiting. Like I did. Don't build a shrine to someone who never deserved it." Layla's eyes filled. "But you weren't wasted. You were," her voice cracked, "you were everything I had." Denise smiled, a sad, slow smile that carried the weight of a lifetime. "Then be more than me. Be louder, braver, whole." The officer stepped in gently, nodding it was time. Layla finally reached out, gripping her mother's hands through the cold metal cuffs. "They can lock you away, Mom, but they can't take your truth. Then carry it carefully, baby. It's heavier than it looks." And with that, Denise Carter walked out, head high, wrists bound, leaving behind a daughter who now held the torch of everything she'd once buried. Florida Women's Correctional Facility wasn't the worst place to end up, but it was still prison. The walls were beige. The lights always buzzed. The smell of bleach clung to the air like a second skin. But Denise Carter didn't flinch when the cell door first clanged shut behind her. She sat on the bottom bunk, looked at the gray sheets, and whispered to herself, "At least now, the waiting is over. No more anniversaries spent lighting candles for a man who wasn't dead. No more pretending. No more questions. Just time and silence." At first, the other inmates didn't know what to make of her. She wasn't loud. She didn't cry. She didn't try to make friends. She read. She listened. She helped mop the floors and volunteered for the medical wing, where she assisted the nurses with blood pressure readings and sorting medications. Word got around about why she was there. They called her the widow who shot her ghost. Some respected her. Some feared her. One younger woman named Trinity, barely 21, in for armed robbery, once leaned over during lunch and asked, "You really kill your husband after 15 years?" Denise looked up from her tray. "No, he killed himself when he left me. I just handled the funeral." Trinity didn't ask again. Letters from Layla came once a week. They were typed, always signed in pen at the bottom. Layla visited monthly, flying in from Kentucky with a bag of news. Her new job at the podcast studio, her apartment near the river, the guy she wasn't really dating, but maybe sort of was. Denise lived for those visits. They'd sit in the visitation hall, concrete floor, plastic chairs, vending machines humming, and talk like mother and daughter again. Not about Marcus. Never about Marcus. But about books, life, memory. "You okay, Mom?" Layla asked one day, her eyes scanning her mother's face. "I'm not angry anymore," Denise said, folding her hands gently. "That's something, isn't it? It's everything." After a year, Denise began writing. At first, just in a notebook the prison counselor gave her. Pages filled with what-ifs and could-have-beens. But the more she wrote, the more she realized her story wasn't about Marcus at all. It was about identity. About a woman who gave everything to someone else's life, then had to build her own from the ruins. She titled it The Widow's Ledger. The counselor submitted it to a local prison writing program. A publisher took notice. Within 2 years, Denise Carter's name appeared in a national magazine for her essay Love, Grief, and the Man Who Vanished Twice. Behind bars, she became something she hadn't been in decades. Seen. One summer afternoon, as she sat in the prison yard journaling beneath a half-dead palm tree, Trinity approached again. "You ever miss him?" Denise paused, pen in hand, then nodded once. Slowly, "I miss who I thought he was." She looked up. "But I love who I'm finally becoming." In a place built to strip people down, Denise had found the pieces she'd long forgotten. Resilience, voice, peace. The world outside would go on. New names, new stories, a resort repainted and renamed. But inside, one woman, once defined by loss, was finally beginning to live. Not as a widow, not as a wife, not even as a killer, but as herself. After the trial, Layla Carter found herself walking through life with two shadows, one cast by her father, the other by the mother who pulled the trigger. She didn't run from either. Instead, she faced them head-on. Graduating from college just weeks after her mother's sentencing, Layla declined the usual celebratory parties. No cap-and-gown selfies. No champagne toasts. She took her diploma, drove back to her apartment in Louisville, and began recording. Not a podcast. Not yet. A confession. Her voice, trembling at first, spilled into the mic. "My name is Layla Carter. You've probably heard about me, or worse, about my mother. I grew up believing my dad was a hero. I now know he was a liar. And this is what it's like to grow up in the wreckage of a beautiful story that was never true." She titled the project Buried Twice. Each episode unpacked a layer. The marriage, the disappearance, the grief, the lie, the revenge. She didn't dramatize. She didn't defend. She simply told the truth, and America listened. Within months, her podcast had over 500,000 downloads. People sent letters. Some called her brave. Others said she was making money off of murder. But Layla didn't flinch. "I'm not here to justify what my mom did," she said in episode 4. "I'm here to make sure no one forgets why." She visited her mother often. Sometimes, they'd sit in silence, hands clasped, hearts aligned without words. Other days, they'd argue about the podcast, Denise unsure about becoming a public symbol. "I don't want to be some tragic icon, Layla," she once said. "You're not," Layla replied. "You're just unfinished." In year 3 of Denise's sentence, Layla stood before a packed auditorium at a storytelling conference in Chicago. She took a deep breath. "The world wanted my mom to be either a monster or a martyr. But she's neither. She's a woman who broke, because the life she thought she had was never real." A pause. Then she added, "And I'm the daughter who learned how to live in the truth she left behind." The applause came slowly, then all at once. Denise's story was no longer just a headline. It was a mirror held up to every quiet, grieving woman who'd ever lost herself inside someone else's life. And Layla made sure it would never be forgotten. 1 year later, on what would have been Marcus Carter's 55th birthday, Layla returned to the Bahamas. She didn't stay at the resort. It had since changed names, repainted its walls, and scrubbed its history clean for brochure photos. But she found the same stretch of shoreline, the same salt air, and the same heavy silence Denise once stood in. She brought with her a small velvet pouch. Inside was the necklace her mother used to wear every Sunday, the one with the tiny silver locket, no bigger than a thumbnail, holding a grainy photo of the three of them, Marcus, Denise, and baby Layla. It had been all Layla had left of her family for most of her childhood. Now it was just metal, a weight that didn't belong around her neck anymore. She walked barefoot to the water's edge. The tide rolled in soft and slow, whispering against the sand like it knew the truth too. Layla knelt, dug a shallow hole in the wet shore, and buried the locket. She marked the spot with a smooth black stone, one she'd etched earlier with a nail file. Until the sea gives us back. Then she stood, let the waves wash over her feet, and whispered, "Goodbye, Dad. For real this time." She didn't cry. She didn't look back. She just walked away, the ocean erasing her footprints behind her, the same way it had once erased a man named Marcus Carter.